Hey Gale fans, this is Seth Greenwood with another episode of Chasing Storms, and I realize it has been a really long time since we last updated an episode. So, without further ado, I can give you all the excuses in the world just to say that I've had a very, very busy holiday season, and we're in the new year now, so I'm just going to act like that never happened because we're in 2019 now. That was 2018. So let's go ahead and get this episode kicked off so we can have a good year. All right. This week, we find ourselves back in the Norman study. Now, if you remember, we last left our hero on the floor with the talisman in chapter 1. And Lori kind of randomly shows up. Here we kind of find ourselves right back in the same situation. The woman is gone. She's left the talisman. Lori has entered the room. The fire is spreading. And there's probably a lot of questions that are going on in Gale's mind right now. One primarily being, Lori, why are you here? But before he even has a chance to ask that question, Lori shushes him. And that's when he remembers, yes, the cops. They're actually surrounding the house. They've probably seen, smelt, or heard, the fire, and they're coming up to check on it. You're probably hearing radio chatter and things like that. So, I'd like to go ahead and veer off a little bit, just to say that this situation is a disaster. Okay? And everything that points to this situation, or every result that has happened so far, or everything that has happened so far, I'm getting tongue-tied with my words today, but everything that has happened so far is a result of a decision, or multiple decisions that Gale has made. And we're probably asking ourselves, why is Gale making so many bad decisions? Because we would actually assume that Gale, being a graduate of law school and starting his own practice and coming from a wealthy family and being very well educated, that he should not be making such haphazard decisions. But I would say that if you remember in the first chapter, we've already went back through Gale, bringing up some repressed memories back to his consciousness. And before that, we've learned of his father's mysterious death, and we suspect that there might be some foul play there. So there's a little bit of trauma coming back up into Gale's life. And there's some unanswered questions that he needs answers to, and he feels that he needs answers to those questions right now, this second. And this is causing him to make a few irrational decisions that are spiraling him into this disaster that he is creating. Unlike normal heroes, if we think of Batman and normal vigilante heroes, if we think of Batman and we think of the Punisher, which is Bruce Wayne and Frank Castle, let's just use those two for an example. Bruce Wayne was a little boy, and his parents were murdered when he was small. So, you could kind of compare Gale's situation to something like that. But Bruce Wayne was a small child, and he was very wealthy, but he was so innocent and so small that and so weak that he couldn't take on the criminals of Gotham, and he didn't have a plan, much like Gale. But he couldn't. Him not being an adult, he couldn't actually start actually figuring out, doing his detective work and fighting the crime that he's been known to fight until he was actually prepared. He would have been killed in an instant as a small child. So he has had a an unlimited amount of money, it seems, and he's also had his whole life to train and perfect the martial arts that he knows, and he's also had his whole life to surround himself with the best education to lead him to be a detective. I guess that makes sense. And then we look at Frank Castle. Now, Frank Castle, the Punisher, he was an adult when tragedy struck. But before tragedy struck, he was already trained to be a soldier. And because he was already trained to be a soldier, he knew exactly what to do when he decided what his path would be. Gale did not have this luxury to be a trained killer, to be a hunter, to be proficient with weapons, to be a great detective. Yes, he's a lawyer. He did not have that luxury, however, and because he is not a trained soldier, and he is not someone who is extremely experienced in martial arts, or he's not a great marksman because he hasn't trained. He probably hasn't even fired a weapon that much before in his whole entire life. We're left with what we have. And it is a person who is an emotional basket case making decisions spur of the moment to try to figure out what's wrong. And all these decisions are, like we said, leading him into disaster. And that's kind of where we leave off with the page. It's kind of a good reflection. At the end of this page, we see Gale, and he's grabbing a gun, and Laurie's asking him if he plans to use it, and he says, "Only if I have to." At this juncture, he's made so many bad decisions that he's forced into another bad decision. He's forced to protect himself. He's in a constant fight or flight mode, and it kind of might be the same constant fight or flight mode that the Punisher Frank Castle is in. However, there is no training for this guy. He has no fight or flight skills, so we're left with what we have. And I guess the questions that I would like to ask you is that, what would you do in this situation? Because apparently, there are many of you who think that Gale shouldn't be making these decisions, I being one of them. But as the writer, I've had so many times to reread this and think how many different directions Gale could have went. And I chose this way. And I don't know, it does make for great storytelling. Everybody loves a good disaster, right? As long as there's some kind of sense to it. And it just, right now at this point, there just doesn't seem to be any sense in it. But actually, if you think in real life, with someone making irrational decisions, that's the reason why they're called irrational decisions. Nothing makes sense. And I don't know if maybe because Gale is the way he is, maybe somebody is playing with him, maybe somebody is testing him, and they know that he would make these kind of decisions and they're using it as a test. Or maybe Gale is going around the wrong way. Maybe he should have ran. Maybe he should have went somewhere else. And maybe he shouldn't have talked to anybody. Maybe he should have started a new life. He had all the money in the world. Why wouldn't he? But he just, at this point, cannot run away from his problems. He's tired of it. So, on some sense, I don't blame him. Do you? Because we all have this... We all have this... this sensation inside of us that pulls us to do something that we think is right. We're not automatically going to do what's wrong if we think it's wrong. Most of the time when we get that little voice in our head that tells us to do something wrong, we actually ask ourselves about it first before we choose to do it. And then when we choose to do it, we know it's wrong, but we do it anyway. At this point in time, there's nothing in Gale's mind that has happened like that. There's nothing in Gale's situation where he has actually thought that he was doing the wrong thing. He's just acting. So that's where I would like to ask you, what do you think Gale's decisions are going to cause, and what would you have done differently than Gale? And I guess I'll leave you with those two questions, because those two questions can spark a lot of reflection, and maybe you can come up with some answers and leave them in the comments below. But I really hope that you guys have came back. I know it's been a while, but I'm going to post this on as many social media outlets as possible. And I would just like to remind you to stay tuned for more episodes coming of Chasing Storms, the making of Gale Storm Chaser. And you can find this episode or another episode of this next week right in the same place. And as always, if you like these episodes, don't be afraid to like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks.